Here's something strange about human behavior. Put the same person in different groups, and they'll hold completely opposite opinions with equal conviction. A liberal in one setting, conservative in another. Aggressive with one crowd, peaceful with the next. Generous here, selfish there. Ibn Khaldun called this group feeling. But it's not just feeling. It's group thinking, group believing, group becoming. And according to his research, it's so powerful that your individual identity is mostly an illusion. 600 years ago, Ibn Khaldun was watching something that puzzled him. He saw the same people behave completely differently, depending on which group they were part of. A merchant who was ruthlessly competitive in the marketplace would become generous and cooperative when surrounded by his family clan. A scholar who valued reason and debate in academic circles would become emotional and irrational when his tribal loyalty was questioned. Ibn Khaldun realized this wasn't random. It was a pattern. According to academic research on his work, he identified what modern psychology now calls group solidarity, but his term was more specific. He understood that humans don't just join groups, they become absorbed by them. The group doesn't just influence your behavior, it reshapes your very identity. Modern researchers studying Ibn Khaldun's theories have found that he described what we now recognize as one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. According to academic analysis, Ibn Khaldun believed that this group feeling was a very strong and lasting prejudice that becomes a driving force in the cycle of civilization. Think about your own life. When you're with your family, you probably act one way. With your work colleagues, you might be completely different. With your old school friends, yet another version of yourself emerges. Most people think this is just adapting to social situations. But Ibn Khaldun saw something deeper and more troubling. He noticed that people don't just change their behavior in different groups. They change their beliefs, their values, even their sense of right and wrong. And most importantly, they're completely unaware that this transformation is happening. Ibn Khaldun was studying political power and social change when he discovered this pattern. He watched as different tribes and communities rose to power, dominated others, and eventually collapsed. But what fascinated him wasn't just the political mechanics. It was the psychology behind it. He observed that when people felt strongly connected to a group, they would do things that made no sense from an individual perspective. They would sacrifice their personal interests for the group. They would attack people they had no personal quarrel with. They would defend positions that contradicted their own previous beliefs. According to scholarly analysis of his work, Ibn Khaldun understood that this group feeling wasn't just about loyalty or belonging. It was about psychological fusion. The individual mind becomes so intertwined with the group mind that independent thought becomes nearly impossible. Here's how it works in daily life. You walk into a meeting at work. Without consciously deciding anything, you immediately scan the room to understand the group dynamic. Who has power here? What opinions are acceptable? What positions will get you accepted versus rejected? Within minutes, maybe even seconds, you've unconsciously calibrated your personality to fit the group. You emphasize certain aspects of yourself and suppress others. You find yourself agreeing with people you might disagree with in private. You laugh at jokes that aren't actually funny to you. Ibn Khaldun would say, you're not being fake or manipulative. You're experiencing a fundamental aspect of human psychology. Your individual identity is much more fluid than you realize. It shifts and adapts based on the group context you're in. But here's where it gets more serious. Ibn Khaldun observed that strong group feeling doesn't just change how you act in meetings. It changes how you think about the world. People with intense group loyalty start to see reality through the lens of group. Benefit. Research on Ibn Khaldun's theories shows that he understood how group psychology creates what modern academics call in-group versus out-group thinking. But his analysis went deeper. He saw that once group feeling takes hold, people lose the ability to evaluate their group objectively. Your group becomes not just good, but obviously good. Their successes prove their superiority. Their failures are explained away or blamed on outside forces. Meanwhile, other groups become not just different, but clearly inferior. Their successes are dismissed as luck or cheating. Their good qualities are ignored or reinterpreted as weaknesses. Ibn Khaldun watched this pattern repeat throughout history. A tough, cohesive group would develop strong group feeling. This solidarity would give them advantages in competition with other groups. They would win battles, gain territory, accumulate wealth and power. But then something predictable would happen. Success would change the group dynamic. According to academic analysis of Ibn Khaldun's cyclical theory, he observed that successful groups gradually lose the very qualities that made them successful in the first place. The group feeling that once created discipline and sacrifice starts to create entitlement and complacency. The solidarity that helped them overcome external enemies becomes internal competition for status and resources. The shared hardship that bonded them together disappears, and with it, the psychological glue that held the group together. Ibn Khaldun saw this as an inevitable cycle. Strong group feeling creates power. Power creates comfort. Comfort weakens group feeling. Weak group feeling makes the group vulnerable to newer groups with stronger solidarity. And the cycle begins again. But what does this mean for you personally? Ibn Khaldun's insight suggests that much of what you think of as your individual personality is actually a collection of group identities that you've internalized. Think about your political beliefs. Can you trace them back to independent research and careful reasoning? Or did they develop from the groups you were part of growing up, the communities you joined as an adult, the media sources your social circle considers credible? Consider your career choices, your lifestyle preferences, even your taste in music or food. How many of these reflect truly individual decisions versus unconscious conformity to group norms? Ibn Khaldun wasn't saying individual thought is impossible, but he was pointing out that it's much rarer than most people assume. According to research on his psychological theories, he believed that genuine independence of mind requires conscious effort to step back from group influence. The challenge is that group feeling operates largely below the level of conscious awareness. You don't experience it as external pressure. You experience it as your own authentic preferences and beliefs. The group's values feel like your values. The group's enemies feel like your enemies. The group's interests feel like your interests. This is why Ibn Khaldun's analysis was so unsettling to his contemporaries and remains challenging today. He was suggesting that what we think of as individual identity is largely an illusion. Most of the time, you're not thinking your own thoughts. You're thinking the thoughts that your various groups have programmed into you. Modern psychology has confirmed many of Ibn Khaldun's observations. Research shows that people consistently adjust their opinions to match their social groups, often without realizing they're doing so. Studies demonstrate that group membership influences everything from moral judgments to perceptions of basic facts. But Ibn Khaldun went further than modern psychology in one important way. He connected individual group psychology to large-scale social change. He showed how the psychological patterns he observed in individuals created predictable cycles in civilizations. According to academic analysis, Ibn Khaldun understood that societies rise and fall based on the psychological state of their members. When people have strong group feeling toward their society, they make sacrifices for the common good. They work hard, follow rules, defend their communities. But when group feeling weakens, individuals start prioritizing personal benefit over collective welfare. They become less willing to pay taxes, serve in the military, or respect social institutions. The society becomes vulnerable to internal conflict and external conquest. Ibn Khaldun observed this pattern playing out repeatedly in the civilizations around him, but he also saw it happening within smaller groups. Businesses, organizations, families, friend groups all follow similar cycles of solidarity, success, complacency, and dissolution. Understanding Ibn Khaldun's theory offers a way to observe your own psychological processes more clearly. Next time you're in a group situation, try to notice how your thoughts and feelings shift align with the group dynamic. Pay attention to how your individual preferences seem to naturally match with the group values. Notice how other groups suddenly seem less reasonable, less moral, less intelligent than they did when you are thinking about them independently. Observe how the group's version of events feels obviously true, while alternative perspectives feel obviously biased or misguided. This isn't about becoming cynical or rejecting all group membership. Ibn Khaldun recognized that humans are inherently social. Group feeling serves important functions. It creates cooperation, shared sacrifice, mutual support. Societies couldn't function without some level of group solidarity. But Ibn Khaldun also saw the dangers of unconscious group psychology. When people lose awareness of how group feeling influences their thinking, they become vulnerable to manipulation. They make decisions based on group loyalty rather than careful analysis. They support policies that benefit their group's leaders rather than their own interests. According to research on his theories, Ibn Khaldun believed that awareness of group psychology was essential for wise decision-making. Understanding how group feeling works doesn't eliminate its influence, but it creates space for more conscious choice. You can choose which groups to align with based on their actual values and behaviors rather than just emotional attachment. You can evaluate information more objectively by considering how your group loyalties might be biasing your interpretation. You can make decisions that serve your long-term interests rather than just your group's short-term advantage. Ibn Khaldun's analysis also offers perspective on social and political conflicts that seem irrational from an individual standpoint. When you see people supporting positions that seem to contradict their own interests, group psychology often provides the explanation. People aren't necessarily being stupid or evil. They're responding to powerful psychological forces that prioritize group loyalty over individual logic. Their identity has become so fused with their group that they literally cannot see alternatives. Clearly, this understanding doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does suggest more effective approaches to social change. Instead of trying to convince people through individual reasoning, it may be more effective to address the group dynamics that shape their thinking. Ibn Khaldun's insights remain remarkably relevant today. Social media has amplified group feeling by making group boundaries more visible and group differences more emotionally charged. People increasingly live in information bubbles that reinforce group identity while filtering out challenging perspectives. Political polarization reflects the same patterns. Ibn Khaldun observed centuries ago. People align with political tribes and then adjust their beliefs to match tribal positions, even when those positions change over time. Individual policy preferences matter less than group loyalty. Economic inequality follows similar patterns. People's attitudes toward economic policies depend heavily on which groups they identify with rather than objective analysis of the policy's effects. Group feeling overrides individual economic interest. Even in personal relationships, Ibn Khaldun's analysis applies. People often choose romantic partners, friendships, and social activities based on group compatibility rather than individual preference. They maintain relationships that serve their group identity even when those relationships don't serve their personal happiness. The key insight from Ibn Khaldun's work is that true independence of thought requires ongoing effort to step back from group influence. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial or rejecting all group membership. It means maintaining conscious awareness of how group dynamics influence your thinking and decision-making. Ibn Khaldun, showed that the groups you belong to don't just influence your behavior. They shape your perception of reality itself. They determine what information you pay attention to, how you interpret that information, and what conclusions seem reasonable to you. Recognizing this influence creates an opportunity for greater psychological freedom. When you understand how group feeling operates, you can make more conscious choices about which groups to align with and how much to let group loyalty influence your individual decisions. You can maintain beneficial group relationships while preserving space for independent thought. You can contribute to group welfare without losing your individual identity. You can navigate group conflicts more skillfully by understanding the psychological forces at work. Ibn Khaldun's analysis ultimately suggests that the highest form of human development involves transcending unconscious group psychology while still maintaining conscious social connection. This requires ongoing vigilance, self-reflection, and willingness to question beliefs that feel obviously true. The next time you find yourself certain about something, especially something that aligns perfectly with your group's position, remember Ibn Khaldun's warning. Your certainty might not reflect individual reasoning. It might reflect how completely you've absorbed your group's perspective. True individual thought is possible, but it's rarer and more difficult than most people realize. Ibn Khaldun's contribution to human understanding is showing us how group feeling works and why becoming conscious of it matters for both personal freedom and social wisdom.